Hi, Marina. How are you doing?
Hello, how are you? Good. Really excited to be here.
It's great to have you here. I'm really looking forward to your talk. Before we jump into that, I understand that you're co-founder of, excuse my pronunciation here, Pioneerus Dev. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Of course, Pioneers is an incredible community that we co-create here in Colombia, South America. And we focus on women when under or poetry backgrounds, they want to learn web technologies, and we're able to provide like workshops or meetups to trying to share some knowledge that we have in the industry.
Oh, well, that sounds amazing. I'm really, really pleased to hear those sorts of things are going on. And yes, great. So today you're going to talk us through some best practices for securing Node applications and not to leave backdoors open that can be exploited by hackers. So please welcome Marina Villa with Node.js Best Practices Securing Your Applications.
Thank you. So hello, everyone. I'm Marian from Colombia. I'm full stack product designer at NODESOURCE. And I also have 12 years of experience creating digital products in different industries. And another thing is I consider myself an eternal apprentice. I'm an apprentice of JavaScript because my background comes from design. And as a developer who has learned by herself, I always ask myself, even before joining a high-performance teams like NodeSource with incredible software engineers, and where, of course, our core is Node.js, how to follow the best practice, always keeping security in mind. So let's begin. So we have an incredible tool called Solid. For those who want to know a little more, they can Google it right now. But this talk is about facilitating for those who are just starting out, or for those who want to have had the checklist of best practices to have your Node.js application secure. We have to have in mind these 4 topics. These 4 thematic aces are architecture, design, code, and deployment. So, of course, you already know something about Node.js, and if you are connected here with me, it's clear that you have an interest in this incredible tool that it is. But I don't want to miss the opportunity to highlight 4 important key points about Node.js project. So, primary is used as a backend server for web applications. In the world of microservice, you can find it pretty much everywhere. And one of the advantages of Node.js is the ability to install additional modules. And it's very popular, but we know for that hackers will try to find a way to find vulnerabilities. So let's start with architecture. So having a good starting point when it comes to our project architecture is vital for the life of the project itself. How to be able to tackle changing needs in the future. So we need to start thinking in how will be like, or what we are going to do with our project, trying to write clean and readable code, write reusable pieces of code across our application, avoid repetition, and add new features without disrupting existing code. So everything has to have its place in our application. So create a folder structure for our project will be like the first thing we need to do. And this will be like the perfect place to group common elements. In particular, we want to define a very important separation, which brings us to the second rule. And the second rule will be separate business logic to the API roots. Frameworks like Express are amazing, and they provide us with incredible features for managing requests, views, and routes. with such support, it might be tempting for us to put all the things together, but this will quickly make them into giant monolithic blocks that will reveal themselves to be unmanageable, hard to read, prone to decomposition. So please also don't forget how the testability of our application will decrease with consequently longer development times. At this point, you might wondering, how do we solve this problem? Where can I put my business logic in a clear and intelligent way? So the response will be use a service layer. So this is the place where all our business logic should live. Is basically a collection of classes, each with these methods that will be implementing our app's core logic. The only part you should ignore in this layer is the one that accesses the database that should be managed by the database access layer. And now we've defined these three initial rules, so we can graphically represent the result like this. And the subsequent folder structure can then become something like this. Also, use a config folder to organize configuration files, and it could look like this. And establish a scripts folder for long npm scripts, something like this. And use dependencies injection and Node.js literally packed with amazing features and tools to make our lives easier. However, as we know, working with dependencies can be quite troublesome most of the time due to problems that can arise with testability and code manageability. So there is a solution for that, and it's called dependency injection. And dependency injection is a software design pattern in which one or more dependencies or services are injected or passed by reference into a dependent object. By using dependency injection inside our Node.js application, you can streamline the unit testing process, passing dependencies directly to the models you would like to use instead of hard coding them. So avoiding useless models coupling, making maintenance much easier, and accelerate your Git flow. After you define your interface, they will style like that, so you can avoid any merge conflicts. Design. So in design, so now that we have got dependencies injection under our belt, we can also implement unit testing for our project. Testing is an incredible and important stage in developing our application, and the whole flow of the project, not just the final result, depends on it, since buggy code will slow down the development process and could cause another problem. So a common way to test our application is to test them by units, and the goal of which is to isolate a section of code and verify its correctness. And when it comes to procedural programming, a unit may be an individual function of procedure, and this process is usually performed by the developers who write the code. Another rule you could implement in the designing phase will be use another layer for third-party service call, and often when you have an application, we may want to call a third-party service to retrieve certain data or perform some operation. And still very often, if we don't separate this call into another specific layer. So we might run into an out-of-control piece of code that has become too big to manage. So a common way to solve this problem is to use the PubSub parent. And this mechanism is a messaging parent where they have entities sending messages called publishers and entities receiving them called subscribers. The publish subscriber model enables event-driven architectures and asynchronous parallel processing while improving performance, reliability, and scalability. So it's really important to have this in mind. The other thing is use the proper tools. And when you get closer to production, you are going to need to review the performance and speed of your application. So keep an eye on small errors while keeping the entire application code uniform. And use a style. This style guide still thinking about how to properly format your code in a consistent way. Why NoAdapt, one of the amazing style guides there live out there. For example, Google or Airbnb have provided to us. So reading code will become incredibly easier, and you won't get frustrated trying to understand how to correctly position that curly brace. So read code and try to implement the best practices that other big companies has live for us. And finally, code. And in code, it doesn't matter if you are an experienced developer or if you are just entering the industry. It is important to keep in mind that good code practices should be reviewed through the career, and Node.js is not the exception. So comment your code, writing a difficult piece of code where it's difficult to understand what you are doing and most of all, why. Never forget to comment it. This will become extremely useful for your team, your fellow developers, and for your future self. So all of whom will be wondering why exactly you did something 6 months after you first wrote it. So keep in mind this. And another good practice is keep an eye on your file size. So files that are too long are extremely hard to manage and maintain. So always keep an eye on your file length. And if they become too long, try to split them into modules, packaged in a folder as files that are related together. Use compression, and the server can use zip compression to reduce file size before sending them to a web browser. This will reduce latency and lag. And use promises. So using callbacks is the simplest possible mechanism for handling your asynchronous code in JavaScript. However, route calls often sacrifice the application control flow, error handling, and semantics that were so familiar to us when using synchronous code. So a solution for this is promises in Node.js. Promises bring in more props than cons by making our code easy to read and test, while still providing functionally programming semantics together with a better error handling platform. Okay, so use promises, error handle. So handling support. So finding yourself in a situation where you have an unexpected error or behavior in your app is not all pleasant. I can guarantee errors are impossible to avoid when writing our code. So that's simply part of being human. So dealing with them is our responsibility. And we should always not only use promises in our applications, but also make use of the error handling support provided by the cache keyword. So use this. And finally, we have deployment. So deploy. When we have reached production, today I want to share a rule of our green diamond, of course. I have invented this, but the emerald rule is always planned for production from day one. So you always think about the scalability of your application, and finally production. In production, things get messy. So use the proper tools, and this meaning ensuring you save node data locally on a specific web service, utilizing cache heavily, gauging memory usage and leaks, minimizing the usage of anonymous functions, making use of CLI tools to detect failures before sending to production, logging wisely, and having an error handling strategy in a place for the very start. Below are a set of practice that we developed along the way that we serve as well. So performance monitoring should be a part of your development process to detect possible problems before they are visible in production, not only when issues arise. So a few minutes ago, one of our favorite persons, Liz Brody, the presentation that she did here in Outcome Remote was priceless. So I invite you to take a look at her and her end of the session, maximizing Node.js performance, and learn more about performance in production. The other thing is always keep the stable versions of the technologies you are using, or you need to run your application updated to the latest technologies. And please, monitoring. At the fundamental level, monitoring means you can easily identify when bad things happen at production. So when nailing down the requirements, start with defining the core set of metrics that must be watched to ensure a healthy state: server RAM, CPU, node processes, RAM, number of processes restart, the number of errors in the last minutes, average response time, etc. Then go over some advanced features you may fancy and add them to your wish list. And delegate anything possible to a reverse proxy. So Node is awfully bad at doing CPU-intensive tasks like SSL termination, discipline, etc. So employ a real middleware service like engines. Otherwise, you'll find your single thread busy by networking tasks rather than dealing with your application core, and performance will degrade accordingly. So it's very tempting to cargo code express and use its rich middleware offering for networking related tasks like serving GCP, encoding, sharing files, SSL termination, and trolling requests. But please remind yourself that Node is not a web server. So this will eventually turn out to be a performance kill due to its single thread model, which will keep the CPU busy for long periods. Make use of SSL by encrypting the data transmission. So you need an extra layer of security. So make sure that you have this covered. Node.js developers read the SSL key from the file in the Node server itself. So you should always do that using reverse proxy. Install SSL on reverse proxy and let the outside world communicate with your Node app via reverse proxy. Here you need to take care of logs. So logs can quickly end up being merely a warehouse of book statements on the enable of a detailed dashboard that tells me a story of your app. Probably you will need an APM, and that's why I invite you to check like our tool. But you probably need to have in mind that this logging framework will have an impact on your performance as well. So you need to make sure to pick like the right tool to take care of your application. Okay, log dependencies. So NPM lets dependencies drift across environments by default, even when your code is identical across all environments. And when you install packages at various environments, it tries to fetch packages latest patch version. So with the use of npm content files that direct each environment to save the exact and know the latest version of every package, you can overcome this issue. So use npm shrink wrap for finer grain control that states exactly which packages and versions should be installed, so no environment is tempted to fetch newer versions. Ensure error monitor and management. So the most painful and time-consuming task when it comes to keeping Node.js environment stable has to be error management. And the lack of a solid strategy is in asynchronous flow for error paths, and the one thread model is to blame for this. So you will have to truly understand that time the error management is here. There's no way around this. So you need to have in mind always a correct way or the best practices to error management in your application. So here we need to have the node processes guarded and restarted upon failure. So trying to don't use containers, use tools that provide simplicity and restarting capabilities and rich integration with Node. So if you have a strong skill with Linux, you could use the system and run Node as a service. But if you use Docker or any container technology, things are bound to get more interesting. Side, it is usually accompanied with cluster management tools that deploy monitoring and heal containers. And take in mind the CPU. So at its basic form, a node app runs over a single CPU core, while all other remains idle. You have to replicate the node processes and utilize all CPUs. And discover errors. So monitoring and performance products proactively, gauge code base and API. And so they can go beyond traditional monitoring and measure the overall user experience across services and tiers. For instance, some APM products are highly highlighted as a transaction that lost to slow the end user while highlighting the root cause. So that's why I recommend you to tools to compare the right APM tool for your case and for your application. Maintenance endpoints is a secure HTTP API that is part of the app code, which is the production team can view and invoke multiple useful functionalities. And this endpoint comes into use when the conventional DevOps tools fail to gather a specific type of information, or when you choose not to install such tools. And the standing rule is to use professional external tools for maintenance and monitoring the production, since they are more accurate and robust. And take the obvious checkpoints, security checkpoints here. So Node embodies some unique security challenge. A secure system demands a far more extensive security analysis. So the basics includes creating a private network to SSH within your systems, guarding business instruction with SSL or TLS, avoiding SQL injection attacks by using stored procedures or parameterized queries, sending careful HTTP headers and using cookie security. Hardcore security checks need a professional expertise. And get your front end separate from the back end. So use the dedicated middleware to serve front end content as you do its single thread mode. Node performance get affected while dealing with many static files. So otherwise, your single node thread will remain busy streaming hundreds of HTML, images, React, Angular files instead of allocating all its resources serving dynamic content. And use a serverless platform that explicitly enforce stateless behavior or kill your server's priority. This is a good practice because failure at a single server leads to application downtime rather than killing a single faulty machine. Measure and guard your code. So Node.js has a complicated relation with memory. In a smaller application, you can fairly gauge memory with the help of shell commands, but in larger applications, consider entrusting this to a robust monitoring system. So else you could wake up on one monitor to find our process memory leak has leaked 100 megabytes. So yeah, you need a professional to keep in mind. So finally, I wish you luck in this incredible journey navigating the world of Node.js. If you have questions, you can contact us. We will be happy to accompany you in this very rewarding path. So thank you for being here with me in NodeConf Remote.
And thank you as well, Marian. That was really interesting. Thanks. I've got a question for you. So Jim has asked, I'm familiar with dependency injection for Java. What is a good JavaScript library for implementing dependency injection?
So I like always recommend like the proper documentation that we write from these several years, because we already have like a DevOps and more experienced engineers in the team. So if you want to read more about the modules and the packages we recommend, I recommend you to visit NodeSource.com, and in the resource and documentation folder, you will find different and proper tools to resolve your question.
Okay, thank you very much. I know this one might sound quite obvious, but when Michael was talking about the latest version of Node moving to long-term support as well, obviously, the sooner you can move on to the latest version that's on long-term support. I've worked on projects where you're still using which version of Node, and I think that is such a big thing because there are so many important security patches that come bundled. I'm just seeing if there's anything else coming in as questions for you. And
so I don't believe. Yeah, so I didn't believe I understand the question. Could you repeat me, please, the question?
Oh, I'm just looking to see if there is a question for you, but I was going to ask do you have any recommendations for tools that you would use to monitor dependency bumping?
Yeah, we already have like a really cool tool. I'm really proud of the project that we build every day, and this tool is Solid. So if you want to check it out, you could sign in the account and Solid platform we already have in our website. So please check on Solid and check your application. That will be the open invitation that I have for today.
Okay, well, thank you, Marian. That has been a very informative talk, and thank you very much for being part of NodeConf Remote.
Thank you for the invitation, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. Bye-bye.